So that kind of leads me on to the last couple of slides, but I just want to touch base on what was that notion of group learning, and I'm not sure if people are familiar with this concept of problem-based learning. So rather than going from, I guess, a traditional point of view where we've um, hand-fed students and audience members to a certain extent, problem-based learning, as the name suggests, hopefully provides the opportunity for the students and the learners to develop their skills while also building upon their knowledge. And I guess the last 15 years to 20 years, we've seen problem-based learning integrate across a lot of the medical and allied health curriculums. Um, so the emphasis is, I guess, put on the learner learning rather than sort of the traditional teacher getting up there and imparting knowledge and having that hierarchical approach. It's all about sort of gathering bits of information or what we call scaffolding. So having a little bit of information which hopefully then leads on to the next bit of information. So rather than learning how to do a systematic review in 2 days, that whole process is broken down into little chunks. I'm always reminded of that saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Sorry, very, very bad joke there. That's what we mean when we talk about scaffolding. So being able to have bite-sized bits of information that learners can build on to foster new experiences and new knowledge. Typically, this is done in small groups. So again, the recent literature would suggest that peer-to-peer learning or learning off your colleagues is much more productive than sitting there in a formal didactic setting. You get the advantage of hearing about different interpretations, different contexts, how other, I guess, determinants may also influence learning and how someone perceives the knowledge that is being talked about. And again, it's using authentic problems. So rather than just talking about what selection bias and performance bias is, it's actually giving people examples of practicing, how to do, or how to assess a paper and how that may relate to doing a risk of bias table down the track. Assessment, we don't use a lot of assessment, obviously, in Cochrane Trainers workshops, but I think it's always nice to have some form of formative assessment. So obviously it doesn't contribute to anything, but it's whether it be a pop quiz or just something, questions that you ask along the way that reinforce I guess people's understanding or learners' understanding of the topic. Again, it doesn't have to be a formal MCQ, but can someone please tell me what such and such is, and having the opportunity to interact like that, I think just reinforces that yes, I do know the concept well, or no, I don't, and if I don't, then there's typically other people that don't, so I'll raise my hand. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this slide. Just, I guess, wanting to highlight that as an educator, you can adopt many roles, whether it be an instructor, where you're just sitting there, and I'm not sitting there, but you're just providing the information. If you're incorporating that problem-based approach, again, being more of a facilitator, or stepping aside and intentionally playing the devil's advocate. So again, there's various roles, I guess, within in a small group context that you can take on board, depending on what you want the learners to take out of the session.
Dragan, there's a question from Daniela. She's wondering whether a lecture can combine a presentation of the theory and a problem-based learning activity.
It can if you adopt that flipped approach whereby the learners do some form of activity before the lecture, and then in the lecture you can sort of pick apart that particular problem and almost run it as a large group scenario rather than as a formal sort of didactic lecture. I know at an undergraduate level we've done that. The students for the first few weeks have been a little bit hesitant in terms of coming forward. They've been conditioned that lectures are always didactic, and we're not going to interact and whatnot. But I think it is possible, and particularly when you break down that barrier of students feeling comfortable, and it's all about I guess setting that scene that the learning environment is safe, so anyone can speak up, and you're not going to be dismissive of questions, and really no question is silly. It's just an opportunity for another learning experience. The last couple of things I just want to touch base on, because I realise we're rapidly running out of time, are just different forms of group work. We've got, I think people have mentioned this in the past, the think, pair and share. So when whether it be in a lecture or a smaller seminar type of presentation, it's always good to pose that question. Say, okay, for the next couple of minutes, talk to your neighbour, think about what we've discussed, and then follow it up by asking people to share. So once again, it's breaking down those barriers, and people can talk on a one-on-one basis without feeling too shy or reserved. And then if they want to volunteer the information to the larger group, that's fantastic as well. Cooperative learning, so learning in those small groups, as we said, groups of 4 to 5 are generally sort of the rule of thumb in terms of forming a good group dynamic. And then the final one is one that I use quite a bit. Again, it's related to group work, so having members of 4 to 5, but then having I guess 4 to 5 groups in which each group undertakes a different concept. So the example that I use with jigsaw strategies is if we were teaching risk of bias, we would divide people into 4 groups, and then each group would specifically work on one aspect of risk of bias. So it might be one group looking at attrition bias, one group looking at selection bias, another group looking at detection bias, etc. They work on that and identify their relevant bias, and then you pick a group member from each of the 4 groups to form another group. So we've gone from 4 groups in which each group has looked at a specific bias to a new set of, I guess, 4 groups where each of the 4 members are coming in with specific information on the bias that they were interested in, or the bias that they investigated. So it's a novel way of giving time for each of the group members in that second group the opportunity to speak and for the others to learn off them. Hopefully I haven't confused everyone with that. I know it's a little bit confusing. Again, if we're in a face-to-face environment, it would be great to demonstrate this, and I usually do, but in a virtual environment, it's a little bit challenging. But I guess the last thing that I wanted to just highlight is whenever we're presenting or whenever you're planning your presentation, is to use as much scaffolding as possible. So when we're talking about scaffolding, using or separating the presentation into bit-sized pieces, so upon reflection the learners can sort of run from concept to concept without it sort of being this one large presentation. People often find it easier to digest in smaller chunks.